Thank you, Helen. I just want to say how pleased I too am to be here. I have the absolute privilege of being Northern Ireland's Commissioner for Children and Young People, and I think, Des, you stewarded the legislation through the last bits after a previous Assembly collapsed when the Commissioner for Children legislation was passing. I'm not going to go on about what my job is because I've only got 7 minutes and I'm here to talk about more important things. KoullaYasouma is my name. Clearly that's not Northern Irish or Irish. And my accent is not Irish either. So I am Greek Cypriot. So do you want to talk about borders and divided islands? I think we can teach you a thing or two. And Lord Brown brought it in. I'm an Arsenal supporter. And I come from the greatest city on this landmass. And I feel quite nervous about saying that in Liverpool. I just want to say why that's quite important, because when you think about the borders and crossing borders, Boris seems to think that when we cross the border from Islington to Camden, it's just the same as when you cross the border. Of all the borders I've lived near, the Islington-Camden border doesn't strike me as the same as the border on the island of Ireland. I have lived in Northern Ireland since 1994 and was visiting quite regularly before then, but I've worked very hard, obviously, to protect my accent. The Good Friday Agreement, I spent a glorious day yesterday with my nearly 21-year-old daughter. Good Friday Agreement, and I get very emotional here, so just bear with me. The morning of the Good Friday Agreement, she was 9 months old, and as I fed her porridge, I made her the promise that the Northern Ireland she would live in would be better than the one her father grew up in. And that promise has been fulfilled. The Northern Ireland, the generation who were my daughter's generation and my youngest daughter's generation who were born after the Good Friday Agreement, is a better, much, much better Northern Ireland than the one that Helen and Michael and some of you were brought up in. It's a Northern Ireland that isn't violent as it has been, that's not characterised by soldiers on the streets and checks going into supermarkets. There is, until recently, was less about orange and green and more about who we are and celebrating, and is about a border that is seamless. So for people living along that border, as has already been said, it's been a joyous thing, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. However, we still have work to do for children and young people in Northern Ireland. This is really quite important about the Good Friday Agreement and Brexit and taking us back, because we still have work to do. 98% of our public housing is segregated along the lines of religion. Only 77% of children go to a school that doesn't define itself predominantly as Protestant in the controlled sector or Catholic in the maintained sector. So 93% of our children go to schools that define themselves one religion or the other. When we talk about academic selection and what that's meant. We still have some tensions around significant events throughout the year, the 11th and in August, the internment. We still haven't yet been able to talk to our children and young people, children who were born after the Good Friday Agreement, about the past. Young people don't necessarily get why Northern Ireland is the way it is, because we still haven't found a dialogue, by a narrative that we can talk with our children and teach them about that, particularly in our schools. We have poverty levels of around 25% of children and young people, of our children and young people live in poverty, and 25% of our young people have mental health issues. And if you take a map of where those children live, our poorest children, our children not doing as well in education, our children who are dying or hurting themselves as a result of self-harm, that map, and you overlay that with a map most impacted by the conflict, that map will almost be seamless. The conflict in Northern Ireland is not what didn't get over, albeit that we live in a much, much happier place than we lived before, but it's a conflict that's still given to its children and young people, which is why any threat to the Good Friday Agreement, any attempt to revise the Good Friday Agreement cannot be countenanced for our children. And they know that as well as anybody else. Because people talked about Project Fear. We are terrifying our kids around Brexit until we can have a proper conversation about what it should or shouldn't mean. And Tom's talked about the All-Ireland Dialogue. We don't, obviously, because we've not had a government in Northern Ireland since March of last year, and probably not an effective government for 4 or 5 months previous to that. There's been nowhere for us to be able to have our voices heard. And we have welcomed things like the All-Ireland Dialogue. It's been a great opportunity. It's the work that some of the Lords particularly have been doing, and the committees in Parliament and in Brussels as well. We've welcomed those dialogues to be able to get the voices of the people of Northern Ireland to be heard. Just a reminder, 56% voted to remain in Northern Ireland. You need to remember that. So where are we at? So there's been quite a lot of work done around the initial discussions around Brexit were about trade, and that's not wrong. And as the discussions have developed, we've begun to talk about people and what it means for people. And the two aren't indivisible. Of course they're not. You know, people need jobs, people need goods, facilities and services. The two go together. But this work, some of this work that Helen led on with Cora is around the children and young people across the 4 jurisdictions of the United Kingdom. And me and my colleague in the south, when I say we, I mean my office, worked with a group of young people, 20 young people, to deliver this conference, and then 120 people at the conference Declan's attended. We invited some key adults to listen, but with very strict instructions. They had to listen to what the young people say. And I want to very quickly, and Helen, keep me to time, but I want to very quickly tell you what the young people said about Brexit. So, as everyone said, adults have written a cheque that it's today's generation of children who are going to have to, a cheque that today's generation of children are going to have to cash. So, very keen that just because they didn't have a vote at Brexit doesn't mean they don't have a vote. No vote doesn't mean no voice for our young people. I might, oh God, you thought she was giving me the 2-minute warning. I'm not even told you what the kids have said yet. And don't call them kids, Koulla. They hate that, so I'll try to stop that. The young people are saying that Brexit will take years to have a true impact, and like I said, they're the ones who are going to live with it, and they're not the ones who voted for it, which gives us an argument for lowering the voting age to 16, in my view. The Good Friday Agreement is key. They are terrified. Children are terrified we're going to go back to, and you talked about a scenario. In theory, we should have always had an open border on the island of Ireland, but it was, as you say, customs and customs checks, which then brought the police to support the customs officers, which then brought the army to support the police. That's how we got such a hard border, and it's that fragile that there is a risk that we'll go back to that. Children and young people born to living today along that border visit their family without thinking twice, and again, Frank's told you about what that was like. There are 500 children of school age, under 16s, who cross that border every day to go to school. They live on one side and they go to school on another side. And a further 300 teachers cross that border every day to go to work. And another 1,500 young people cross that border every day to go to college. That's not university, that's college. 2,000 children and young people cross that border every day to fulfil their right to education. Children every Sunday cross that border to fulfil their right to worship. They go to their nearest parish because parishes don't necessarily recognise the border. Children and young people cross that border every day to fulfil their right to healthcare, to visit their doctor, to go to the nearest hospital. And we've got a couple of really key all-island agreements around children's cardiac care, which is incredibly important, and also cancer care as well. So the ambulances cross that border every day to make sure children receive vital health care. Children, the family, the other point about the family is really important, is children have split families. Father or one parent lives one side, the other parent lives the other side of the border, and again, in order to be able... And it's not well, they didn't do that in the past. No, they didn't, but it's so much better that they can just get in a car or on their bikes and do that now. Child protection is also huge, and we've heard our police, Chief Constable of Police talk about how amazing it is that we can protect our children regardless of where they're hurt, or which side of the border they're hurt on. And again, we cannot underestimate that both countries being part of the EU have made that seamless, that we can protect our children, particularly around trafficking and abduction. Children, and I've already talked to, are very concerned about farming subsidies. They're very concerned about trade, because they're the children of the people who work in those industries, and they're the ones who've got aspirations to work in those industries themselves. So this isn't about industry versus rights. It's all the same. There was one issue that children and young people brought up that I haven't seen discussed by adults, and both North and South when the groups came together, and that's about providing sanctuary to those, particularly those children and young people who haven't got it as well as them, the Syrian refugees, children from around the world, outside of the EU. Let's not close our borders. And very soon after kids were talking in that vein, we are lucky to have been born on this island. We should have welcome other children who have not been as lucky as us, or living in war-torn areas, or areas that have been affected by. And the young people were very, very, very clear about that. And a lot of our both EU and non-EU children at the moment are disengaging from services in Northern Ireland because they're thinking they're going to get kicked out anyway, because there's no clarity with regards to the message. Now, obviously, we're doing all that we can. So young people, and Lord Brown's talked about it, and I'm going to finish now, have taken this, and they've taken it to Brussels, and they've taken it to Westminster, where they had a great hearing, and they took it to, some of them took it to the All Ireland Dialogue, and we're looking forward to coming up to see Declan's committee, and Niall and I will be speaking at the British and Irish Parliamentary Association. But wherever we go to next, the plea from the children that I and my colleague in the South have worked with, it said, please don't make it worse. Please help us continue on the trajectory of making it better. Thank you very much.